Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. Tim Andersen, the appraiser's advocate here. We're talking real estate. We're talking movers and shakers in the real estate appraisal industry. And we have again with us Craig Morley. Now, Craig has been a constant guest. He's a constant source of knowledge and inspiration. But again, we must issue this disclaimer. While Craig is a sitting member of the Appraisal Standards Board, he is here today as Craig, appraiser, state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states. He is not functioning as a spokesman for the ASB. I'm just asking Craig some questions, and Craig is giving some answers. So, given that, Craig, I appreciate you being with us today. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you, Tim. I'm always happy to get out of the heat. I think we were 113 yesterday. So sitting in an air conditioned office visiting with you is very, very pleasant compared to the alternative.
Well, we won't ask you to move your camera and microphone outside. We'll just keep it here in the office. It isn't 113 degrees here in South Florida, but it might as well be. My wife and I have decided that between 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock, we're going to stay in the house. Now, Craig, you and I have spoken privately about this issue before, and we're going to talk about ROVs uh, uh, and what some of the problems that these bring up for appraisers. These reconsiderations of value are fair because there should be some type of appeal process if the consumer or the client thinks that the appraisal just somehow missed something or somehow wrong. But there is a great potential. I don't want to say possibility. Let me say there's a great potential that the ROV process could be used as a hammer against appraisers rather than a legitimate appeal tool. So let me ask you this question. Why is the ROV process even necessary? They come in generally through the borrower who's not even our client. Yet, given the way they're framed, they appear to be an assault on our independence, impartiality, and objectivity. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's always been discussion in the past about trying to standardize the reconsideration of value. It's never really happened. And with the PAVE task force that was recently initiated, that became one of the elements that the agencies are saying, gee, it'd be nice if there were some kind of reconsideration of value process so that people, if there is a concern about the assignment results, there's a standardized way to request some reconsideration for the results. And of course, as you indicated, the big concern is that we don't want to have put appraisers in a position where they are being asked to compromise their independence, their impartiality, or objectivity. And so the question, that the agencies are trying to deal with, how do we do this? And simply because someone's unhappy with the results doesn't automatically justify a reconsideration of value, or at least I don't think it should be. And yet there is a fear that there's going to put pressure on appraisers that if I didn't hit the predetermined conclusion that someone, the borrower or lender or someone else thinks it ought to be, that we're going to be adding a lot of additional work for an appraiser to get involved with this reconsideration process. And we certainly don't want to see that happen either.
So a reconsideration of value, well, a legitimate tool, has the possibility of, as I said, being used as a hammer. And in using it as a hammer, is that going to obviate the appraiser's confidentiality obligation to the client? Because, the consumer says, well, this is just wrong. This isn't enough money. My property is worth more than this. this can't be anywhere right. So appraiser, you better pull your head out and get this thing done right. Otherwise, and here's the hammer, otherwise I'm going to file a discrimination suit against you with the Department of Justice. And then you can spend the next 3 to 5 years and a couple $100,000 defending yourself. So are we just going to roll over and say, oh, okay, sure, I'll redo it, and yeah, we'll come in at the contract price? And does that obviate our confidentiality obligation to the client?
Well, there's two issues as I see, and before we had the Dodd-Frank and the Home Valuation Code of Conduct, we saw appraisers in this situation more frequently than perhaps we see it now. I recall having assignments where a loan officer or a builder would call in, and I recalling a specific situation where they're building a home that they're believing is going to cost them around $6 million to build, in an area where there are no homes that have sold anywhere close to $6 million. And the builder who's ordering the appraisal in behalf of the lender, and this was it's back in 2005 or 6, before some of the regulations prohibited that kind of thing, basically said, if you can't get the number, we're gonna file a complaint, or there's going to be some punitive action taken. And at that point, I just declined the assignment. I says, I will not accept the assignment on that basis, because you're asking me to come to a predetermined a value. It's an assignment condition that I simply can't ethically take. And that, though, we want to avoid that kind of situation. We don't want to see a situation where, or I personally don't want to see a situation where appraisers are put in a place where they feel like they've got to develop a predetermined conclusion, or there's going to be some punitive action taken against them. It compromises not only the appraiser's ethics, but it also compromises your impartiality and independence. And so having a reconsideration of value process that creates that kind of scenario or environment is certainly not something that I think ought to be done. And I'm confident there are those who would be grateful for that, especially the people who are trying to meet their predetermined objectives. But if the reconsideration goes that way, it's going to create some serious problems for appraisers in acting ethically as they're supposed to.
Have to turn the microphone back on. Okay, so we might be swimming in shark-infested waters on this one. All right. Given that, of course, you can either look at it as swimming in shark-infested waters or having a day at the beach. I guess part of it has to do with attitude. But let me ask you this. Okay, a client or a consumer files an ROV. All right. Can we really be objective in reanalyzing the property, which is what an ROV is? Because the client, the consumer, the whoever, is basically asking us to prove ourselves wrong. So we've already appraised the property. We said it's worth $325,000. And now somebody's asking us to relook at it and come up with $356,000. We've already appraised it. We've already formed a value opinion. How objective can the appraiser be in saying, well, okay, I'll look at it again, and oh, look, I'm wrong? Is that, I don't know, Craig, to me, that just seems both counterproductive and, well, let's just put it that way. That seems counterproductive and monumentally unfair to us.
Yeah, in that type of scenario, it most certainly is. I think where I see the role or place of a reconsideration of value is when factual information is being presented to the appraiser that may not have otherwise been available in performing the assignment. So a couple of illustrations where that might be, where a reconsideration might be appropriate. And I might add, there's ways to deal with these situations that don't include a reconsideration of value. But in the event that an appraiser goes and looks at a property, and perhaps the property owner isn't there, it's on a key box, sometimes you'll get a door code, you get in and you look at the property and you observe what is readily available, and you're unaware of certain facts that could influence your opinion of value, like they just spent $30,000 replacing the entire mechanical system. They put, it's an older home. They put brand new plumbing, electrical. They've got a new heating and cooling system in the property. The effective age is now much lower than it otherwise would be. They put a bunch of insulation in and those kinds of things that aren't readily observable. And so when that information then is pointed out to the appraiser, who, cosmetically, it may not look newish, but the bones of the building have been changed to where it is. And having that information presented to the appraiser saying, hey, you didn't know that we had done these things. And, of course, as the appraiser, I'm going, well, how would I? It's concealed. I can't see some of those things. But being aware of that now might be the basis for me to reconsider my opinion of value. The other scenario where I see the potential for reconsideration of value is in new construction or some of these developments where much of the comparable sales data is not readily available in a multiple listing system or on public records. And so it's not uncommon for us to be doing a new construction project. The vast majority of the builders that we're doing work for don't report their information in the MLS. And so you go through and you find a couple of sales in the MLS that look comparable, and you develop your opinion of value based on the available data. In many of the areas that we do work, I may be able to confirm a sales price and a sales date, but there's a lag time between when the public record data is posted to the and made publicly available on the size and other physical characteristics of the property. And so it may be hard to get reliable information off from the public record. I develop my opinion, and the seller says, wait a minute, we've got a model match that has the exact same features that of this that sold for a similar price. Why didn't you use that? Well, probably because I couldn't confirm the information. And so having the ability to get the best information available for my consideration, that becomes, I think, a reasonable request to reconsider factual information or sales information that may not have been available through the normal, through the ordinary course of business. And so I think that there is a place for it, but I believe that the process needs to be a process that needs to be developed so that the appraiser isn't being contacted by every borrower on the planet that is unhappy with the results. We need to create a process that will prevent the appraiser from being asked to reconsider their value simply because the results aren't what the consumer was hoping for.
Craig, let me follow up on that. The client or somebody files an ROV, and they say, oh, by the way, you didn't have this data in the first place, so please consider it as you reconsider the value. And you go, oh, okay, had I had this data in the first place, I would have used it as part of my analyses, and my number would have been significantly different. So yes, I'm willing to change my value opinion, and let's assume it's going to change for the higher. Okay, now we're supposed to go out and not protect the public, but we are supposed to give the public reason to trust us what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Isn't an ROV basically, especially if we change the value opinion? And as I say that, I remember the hammer we were talking about a few minutes ago. If the appraiser chooses to change the value, most likely because of greater information that came in after the first appraisal, how does that engender trust? How does that develop the public trust in what we do and how we do it? I mean, basically, the client, or excuse me, the borrower is not going to say, "Oh, well, yes, the builder gave the appraiser stuff that the builder didn't give the appraiser in the first place, but should have." All the consumer is going to notice is, "Oh, well, the appraiser got it right the second time, but wouldn't have gotten it right had we not pitched a fit." So, is the ROV process, and again, I believe there should be some type of appeal, but is the ROV process not designed to make us look stupid?
Well, I don't know of any appraiser who is thrilled to go change their conclusions once they've developed them. And certainly not me. I've done it, but I don't like to. So I guess the question becomes, is the trust that the public has for appraisers damaged more by an appraiser being obstinate and not changing it on the basis of factual information? Or does it suggest that an appraiser is truly being objective when factual information is presented and it influences their results? Neither scenario is particularly confidence building in of the appraiser's work product, but one may be better than the other. Two bad situations where I believe, and I think as appraisers we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot. And I can't tell you how many times I hear situations where agents or borrowers try to present information to an appraiser during the appraisal process or prior to the property, observation, and the appraiser says, "No, thank you. I'll get it myself," and they reject information that is being presented by an agent or by a property owner because the claim is, well, I don't want to be biased. I don't want to be influenced by the property owner or the agent. And I think as appraisers, we do ourselves a great disservice by doing that. I hear stories all the time where agents or borrowers are trying to provide information and the appraiser rejects the information. The appraisal comes in lower than expected, and people are upset. And that too compromises the public trust that people have, because it's this we sometimes have this arrogance that says, "Don't talk to me. I don't want to be. I don't want to have any interaction with you." And yet, who knows more about the property than the property owner? And so I think at some point we have to be willing to accept all information and then use our professional judgment to filter through that to determine how does this information influence the assignment results. It's been kind of interesting because the agencies have looked at the VA's process, their Tidewater process, as the kind of the gold standard, and there's potential issues with the way that is being done, but at the same time, the benefit, at least that I see, is that at least the information is being presented to the appraiser before they finish their assignment. Before they've developed their final opinions and conclusions, they've been able to get additional information. And so I don't really see Tidewater being an effective reconsideration of value, because there's really nothing to reconsider if I haven't developed my final opinions and conclusions. And in Tidewater, if it's done the way it's supposed to, I'm still in the development process. And the reconsideration is typically after I've developed my opinions and conclusions, and people are unhappy and they come back and ask you for that reconsideration. And so I think in In a perfect world, what would happen is that as appraisers, we would be more open to receiving that factual information before the assignment is complete, so that we don't have to do the reconsideration of value after the assignment results are developed and reported to the client. And in my experience, that is the best scenario, is try to avoid the situation where we've done a good enough job in the development reporting of the appraisal that there are no questions. They may not like the results, but they can read the report. They see specifically how the comparable sales were selected. It's not a canned statement that says, I did a search and used the best sales available, and here they are. That is not very specific. And what we've been trying to encourage is that the appraiser go through the specifics. I initially looked for sales in the subject subdivision or community. I found this many sales with this kind of a price range. They were either physically similar or they weren't. I expanded my search to include this and that. And from that, I selected the best 3 or 4 or 5 sales and a couple of listings. And I think as people see the specific process, then it is more likely to avoid these reconsiderations, because they can look at it and say, well, okay, I guess this is the best data. I suppose the biggest problem that we have is that when you get consumers and real estate agents, most often they're looking at a price per square foot. And when I get a reconsideration of value that says, well, I've got, a bunch of sales and the average price per square foot is higher than what you come up with, that doesn't mean much to me, because it's not the process that we go through in developing the opinion of value. And so if we're going to have a reconsideration of value, there needs to be some kind of a process so that the people who are appealing or asking for reconsideration are using relevant data that is meaningful to the appraiser, rather than some anecdotal, simplistic approach to saying, well, I got a house half the size of the property I'm appraising that's got a higher sales price per square foot, so it should be higher.
Craig, speaking of that, let's go back to influence. You mentioned appraisers are refusing data from the homeowner, the broker, et cetera, because the appraiser does not want to be influenced, which in and of itself is fine. But yet, how is the listing broker showing up to meet the appraiser at the house and handing the appraiser data any different from the appraiser going to the MLS that same broker filled out? I mean, I never, every time I've been accused of being smart, I've been acquitted because of lack of evidence. But it just seems to me that the appraiser doesn't understand that data are data, and the appraiser has an ethical obligation to analyze them and throw out the data that aren't any good and use the data that are. So I don't quite understand this influence excuse. Maybe you can help me understand that.
Well, honestly, it's hard for me to comprehend. This really became a product of Dodd-Frank, where we had a lot of appraisers who didn't understand what in undue influence represented. We had some appraisers at the beginning who didn't want to talk to anybody, and if a borrower or an agent talked to them, they would claim undue influence, and it was kind of a crazy notion that developed somewhere. But I teach a class for real estate agents on reconsideration of value. And I don't know if that makes appraisers happy or not, probably not. But the reality is that a lot of the real estate agents don't understand what happens behind the curtain for appraisers on how they do what they do. And so we will spend some time going through and explaining that appraisers aren't looking at the sales price per square foot as their primary method in developing value on residential property. And so if you want to appeal an appraisal, number one, don't call the appraiser. The appraiser, if he's following his ethical obligations, can't discuss assignment results with you as an agent or a borrower. And unfortunately, we hear way too many stories where a borrower who doesn't understand the obligations that the appraiser has calls the appraiser and wants to discuss the assignment results. And the appraiser says, "I'm sorry, I can't talk to you," and they hang up. Well, if you've got someone who's unhappy with your assignment results to start with, you can darn well bet they're a lot less happy with you when you hang up on them, because you don't want to talk to them about it. And they don't know the process. And so having a better educational piece that a consumer understands that reconsideration of values always needs to be initiated through the lender. And I oftentimes will go through, I says, listen, in fact, I've told the people when they've called, I've says, you know what, I mean, even if you're right and I'm wrong, I don't practically, if it's for a lender, I don't have a practical way to deliver the report. These things are submitted through a portal. That portal has to be opened up. And if I go and you point out a factual error and it changes my results, and I try to resubmit that to the lender, number one, most of the time I can't do it. And if I can, and that request isn't initiated by the lender, it triggers a regulatory concern that what was there undue influence? Why is this appraiser out here changing the value unbeknownst to me? I didn't ask them to do that. And so I think if we were able to better communicate with the people who are unhappy with the results and say, listen, you know, there's a process that you need to go through, and that process needs to go through the lender. I believe then if the lenders did a better job of vetting the information provided, and we're going through and saying, okay, this looks like it's legitimate, or maybe it doesn't, but they can vet it and provide data in a meaningful way, so that if there are issues that ought to be considered, the appraiser can do that without having to go through the heartburn of having every borrower you do an appraisal for providing you with tons of irrelevant data that you've got to look through and try to figure out how to deal with. And so I believe that having a process that is better than what we have now may actually save the appraisers a little bit of time and aggravation if it's done properly. But if it's not, it could certainly become worse than what it is right now.
So, given this, the ROV process should not devolve solely on the narrow shoulders of the appraiser, but apparently there is some responsibility on the part of the lender, the responsibility on the part of the broker, and responsibility on the part of the property owner if they don't provide the appraiser with data that they have to which the appraiser may not have access. Is that correct?
That's the way I see it. In a perfect world, the way that I believe a reconsideration of value could be done without compromising the appraiser's independence and objectivity would be to have that process initiate with the lender. The lender vets the data, and they're looking for factual information. And to be honest, a lot of times as we pick comparable data, we're trying to pick sales that we think are physically similar, and we're oftentimes using information from an MLS. And sometimes there may be a front photo of the property, and you're reading through comments, and you're trying to filter through the noise and figure out, what is this property really like? What is the actual quality and condition and view and other characteristics? Sometimes that's hard to do. And so it's easy in those situations to not have complete information that would maybe have an impact on your results if you had the more complete information. And so if that reconsideration of value from a broker or from a borrower was, hey, I've been in this home, I'm familiar with this property, either the photos in the MLS are 4 years old, which happens frequently. It's not supposed to, but it happens more frequently than it should, and it looks like a palace, and you discover that, well, those photos were kind of idealized, and they don't really reflect the true character of the property. And so the property is not in great condition. It's really average, and you rated it as good. And let me outline the specific problems with the property. There was some deferred maintenance. Well, that for that sale, as you consider its its influence on market, is going to change how you view that and the market's response to it. So I think if we focus more on the factual information and a little less of the emotional response, because it's not what I needed to meet whatever objective I'm trying to meet as a borrower, then I think we are able to, it puts a little more responsibility and burden on the owner and the broker, if there's one involved, to get relevant, meaningful information. And if they can't provide that, I think what happens is that they are then looking at this and saying, well, maybe this appraisal isn't as bad as I thought it was, because I can't find anything that supports a different conclusion. And at that point, it gives the appraiser a lot more credibility. But if there are mistakes, and not mistakes, but if there are factual variances, then I think that gives you a basis to come in and reconsider the value and not have it be too much of a conflict with the with our original opinion.
Okay, so you're sitting in your office one day minding your own business, and you get a phone call from a borrower who is just spitting mad because the number didn't come in high enough. And there is mention of lawsuits and flat tires on your car and dead pets in the front yard and so on and so forth. What obligation does the appraiser have to initiate the ROV? And depending on your answer to that, what obligation does the appraiser have to follow up with that request?
Well, first of all, I don't think any ROV ought to be initiated between the borrower and the appraiser. I think that's inappropriate. I think because the borrower is technically not a client or an intended user, it's simply inappropriate for the borrower to contact the appraiser and ask them to change their results. And if the borrower is foolish enough to issue threats and those kinds of things, I think from my perspective, I'm going to make really good notes or try to record the conversation and forward that information to my client and say, listen, I got a call from your, from your borrower, and this is the date, this is the time. Here's a summary of what was said to me. I don't know that I can proceed with any additional analysis because I believe my objectivity has been compromised because of these threats that are made to me. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to communicate that to your client, that in those kinds of situations, that's completely inappropriate. And I don't know how an appraiser can proceed with anything else after those kinds of communications have been made to them. But if the borrower is respectful and they are contacting you, trying to get clarity on what happened and wanting to make sure you are aware of some of the factual information that they have, then directing them to the client, to the lender, and saying, hey, I'd be happy to reconsider any factual information that you can provide, but I can't do it right now. You're going to have to contact your lender, make your case to them, let them review it, and if there's merit to what they to your point, then they can contact me, and I will look at the data that is presented, and if it justifies some kind of alteration to the report, we'll do it.
All right, let me change the subject a little bit. This still has to do with ROVs, but it's a little bit tangential to it. The GSEs are sending out a number of quality letters to appraisers. And in addition, they're also going to state appraisal boards, and they're going to the AMCs who hired the appraiser. Now, let's look at this from a standpoint of influence. When Fannie Mae sends a quality letter to an appraiser and to the AMC who hired the appraiser and to the state, which is going to require the state to engage in some type of investigation, isn't that undue influence? And isn't that exactly what Dodd-Frank was supposed to prohibit?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that is undue influence or not. It does. I think the problem that we have, and I just the other day had a conversation with one of the lead people at Freddie Mac, and going through some of the problems that they encounter with some of the work product that they're seeing. And the reality is, as appraisers, we are not consistent in how we do this stuff. And to the extent that they are trying to make you aware of an inconsistency, I think that's fine. I think it's a little bit problematic when that information is being sent to a state as a complaint. That elevates the situation to a much higher level, and it is a problem. But as I talk with these folks at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they're telling me, and I don't know if it's true, but they're telling me that this is not arbitrarily done. It goes through their automated processes, and then they have a warm body go through and look at it. And they claim that they're only sending it after they've discovered a trend or a situation where it seems that it's a bigger problem. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. But at the very least, it ought to be a wake-up call for the appraiser to try to figure out, what is your expectation and how are my results inconsistent with that? And I've certainly had situations where I'll get a note that says your quality rating is different than your peers, or your condition rating, or whatever it is, or square footage, or bedroom or bathroom count, or whatever it is. And at that point, that's a simple inquiry: is explain yourself. Why did you say this was this? And sometimes it'll be because an appraiser who actually looked at the property and had better information has correct information, and you don't, because you pulled it out of an MLS or public record. Or it may be the other way around. You physically saw the property and these data sources are wrong. And usually if you'll explain that, it goes away. But if you have a pattern of consistently misapplying some of these ratings, then it will escalate to a higher level. I think from a practical standpoint, the problem that we've had is by having this high level of kind of the big brother accountability has created a response by too many appraisers where they say, well, I'm just going to rate everything the same. That way, I never get a letter telling me, hey, last week you rated this as being good, now you're rating it as average. What happened to the property that changed the characteristics so it's now good instead of average? And so there has been a tendency for appraisers to dumb down their analysis to where they rate everything the same. And that is a problem. And when those kinds of situations occur and the GSEs observe that kind of trend, and they start sending in these quality letters saying, hey, you're not following the scope of work properly, then perhaps it's time for us to sit down and try to figure out what it is, what their expectation is and what I did wrong, or have good justification for what I'm doing. But I think having some level of accountability is not undue influence. I think it's simply a way to make sure that we're following the processes properly and being able to explain ourselves when those situations occur. And frankly, I'm not aware of a single case where an appraiser who has followed processes properly and has good explanations for what they've done that has ever resulted in any kind of punitive action against the appraiser.
Same mistake. Okay, so what you're saying then basically is, and I'm not trying to be crude here, but maybe it's the appraiser's fault. Maybe the appraiser just bungled it. Maybe the appraiser just was not competent to handle that job. Is that possible?
I think that's a possibility. And unfortunately, I've seen enough appraisals that have been done that you become a little bit jaded and cynical because unfortunately, as a profession, we are not as good as we ought to be. And you talk to any reviewer and they will tell you that there's room for improvement. And so we need to improve ourselves, I believe.
Okay. Craig, I thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your advice. I appreciate your candor. Thank you very much. And please let me extend my best to your family. And I look forward to the next time we speak. Now, again, two things. If someone needs to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Email is usually a pretty good way to do it. My email address is valuepro@gmail.com. There's no E in value, so it's VALUPRO@gmail.com. You can usually, if you want to see any of the little YouTube videos we've done, you can just usually search YouTube for Craig Morley Appraiser, and you'll see a few little things that we've developed on some of these issues. But we've actually got a reconsideration of value video out there that we've done that either as an agent or as a appraiser or others can get some ideas on this topic that we've talked about today.
Okay. And as we record this, it's the middle of July 2023. Are you going to be making any presentations or going to be doing any teaching in the near future?
We're doing it right now. We're undertaking, and this is a business development situation for us, is that we're going throughout a lot of the we're teaching at some of the local, well, not local, but regional MLS board of realtors. And we're talking about some of these issues like the ANSI home measurement standard. We're talking about the reconsiderations of value, and we're doing it in a way, as part of our process to get our face in front of the real estate agents and brokers to help improve business development. And but as far as at a national level, we'll try to be at the appraisals summit in September. It's going to be a little bit tight because my wife and I and a couple of our neighbors are headed to Thailand for 2 weeks, and so we leave in the end of August and get back the middle of September, and so we'll be back just barely in time to get to the appraisal summit. So I'll be there, and we'll be able to visit anybody who shows up at least on the last day of the summit.
Okay, well, bon voyage and safe travels. So, Craig, again, thank you. And we'll continue to be in touch, and we continue to appreciate your advice and wisdom. Thanks, Craig. Bye-bye.